Okay, then. And we are now live for the 30th episode of Space Rocks Uplink. I can see a bunch of people who joined us from all over the world. And we've just been joined by one more person. Mark, how are you doing? Are you receiving?
Very good, Alex. Yes, good to see you from, Paris, as you can see. So.
Obviously. And, what looks like might actually be a Zoom background. I think we're going to talk about the content in just a few minutes. And, I can tell that it seems that we have a lot of new faces joining us for Space Rocks Uplink, which is a pretty great thing. And so I guess it makes sense for us to talk a little bit about what Space Rocks is and, just what you do for a day job, Mark.
Indeed. Well, yeah, thank you to everybody who's joined us this evening. It's always great to see new people online. So I work for the European Space Agency, and I am the Senior Advisor for Science and Exploration. So that covers what we do in human spaceflight, what we do in robotic exploration, and what we do with all of our astronomy satellites and the ones which visit the planets. And my job is to communicate the scientific results from those missions inside ESA to its various committees, to the scientific community, but also the general public. And that's where you and I come in, because one of the endeavors that we started together a few years ago was Space Rocks, where we take the things that ESA does and put them alongside film, music, culture, art, fiction, sort of talk about the wider context in which space exploration and science takes place, because none of these things take place in a vacuum. The cultural aspect of what we do is very important, and lots of people out there are interested in science but don't necessarily have an in to come and ask us questions about what we do. That's what Space Rocks is all about.
Indeed. Well, it definitely brings a lot of people together. And if you don't know about Space Rocks, you might not realize that. I guess you could say Jason is a bit of a veteran, when it comes to, what is a really new endeavor. We've only been around for a few years, but walk us through a bit of what Jason's already done with us. Because of course, he's a familiar face to anyone who knows of any of the many roles he's been in, but he's also a very familiar face in these waters as well.
Yeah, so I met Jason a couple of years ago when we were both speaking at a big science fiction convention in Germany called FedCon, which is around all science fiction, but Star Trek is a key part of that. So Jason was there, we were there from ESA talking about the things that we do. We had a chat in the green room, and it was clear that he was interested in what we were doing. And he's been in, as you say, films with a scientific basis. So on the train back to Germany, from Germany back to the Netherlands, I sent him a text and said, do you want to come and be part of Space Rocks? We're doing a live event later in the year. And that was last year, right? So, and he said yes. So he came on stage, did some conversations with us, was a compere in the first part. And then I asked him if he wanted to come also to our open day at ESTEC in the Netherlands, where I work, the big technical center of the European Space Agency. And he came over for that, and he brought his kids, and had a very lovely day there. And of course, the live events have been shut down now for this year for obvious reasons, and we hope we'll do them live again. But what a great thing is that we can bring him on the live stream this evening on Uplink.
Indeed, it's a great thing, and I think it's really emblematic of what we do, and just how many great supporters we have. And Jason is without question one of our absolute biggest supporters, because I guess he doesn't just play some astounding roles on screen. It's off screen that he really engages with a lot of topics that we're hoping to engage with today, because it's not just about space, it's about its implications as well. If anything, it's a starting point for what we do. And so I suppose without further ado, I'm very pleased to say, not for the first time, we're welcoming Jason Isaacs to Space Rocks. And we're just going to see if he is unmuting, and if he is starting his video. We'll give him a second. This is always an exciting part of the program. There we go. Jason, how are you doing? Are you?
Sorry, I was watching on YouTube. So sorry about
that. The vanity of the actor. You're going to watch yourself now for the next hour.
I wanted to check what you were saying. The whole web of lies you made up about how we met. We met on Tinder, Mark. Let's be clear about this.
I don't know. I'm not exactly.
We're not live,
which way do I slide that? I don't know.
Yeah.
But yeah, we did, and we met, and you are very. What I find entertaining is that I've been to space many times on camera. We can talk about them maybe. And I've played lots of authority figures, but I'm just an idiot. I know nothing. And one of the great joys about knowing you is I ask you the same idiotic questions over and over every time we meet or in a public forum. And I think you think that I'm asking them because it's a new forum and there are people watching. No, it's because I don't remember or process any of the answers. That's why.
So 10 demerits to me for being a bad teacher if my students never remember.
No, I have. It's a sieve-like brain. I might have been born that way, or it might have been that I punched holes in it throughout my teens and 20s. I don't know, but it retains nothing now.
Yeah.
So sorry about that.
Not at all, Jason. It's an absolute pleasure to have you back, certainly. And yeah, I mean, I think obviously, you don't do yourself credit. I mean, anyone who's perhaps familiar with your off-screen persona, possibly your Twitter account, knows that you engage with a wide range of subjects. Some of which I think we hope to breach today. But I think that, as it is Space Rocks.
Now that he's not president anymore, we can talk about him. When he could have put me on a death list or a hit list.
Indeed.
Then
Indeed.
Maybe we shouldn't talk about it. Yeah.
Indeed. But, I mean, look, I mean, you've played so many brilliant roles over the years. We have used Star Trek as a launching off point, but not as the only thing we want to talk about. But we wanted to talk about Final Frontiers, I guess, because, Gene Roddenberry's vision for the future was, in many ways utopian, not completely idealistic. I mean, it was a vision of humanity solving problems.
I mean, it was futuristic, but it was really absolutely rooted in the time that he created it as a way to aim at a solution for the Cold War, for the race wars, for gender wars. Excuse me, just wolfed down a meal in the 3 minutes you gave me. And so, really, although you're right, it was futuristic and it was imagining a world where everybody worked in harmony together for a joint purpose. But it was really written and created, as most space futuristic fiction is, to deal with the problems of today.
Indeed. Well, I mean, this is the interesting thing about it all, right? Because of course, when Mark and we talked about, well, how do we kick this conversation off and so on, and we kind of figured that we always open with a big question. Star Trek is all about the future. So much of science fiction, deals with imagined futures and so on. Do you worry about the future?
Yeah, I mean, I'm driven by fear and anxiety, and this last year has made things 1,000 times worse for me. I find it all too easy to slip down into an abyss, thinking, even though, for instance, I'm very vocally anti-President Trump and the kind of racist, divisive policies he's been following. So when he lost the election, there was a brief moment of elation. And then I started to think, well, it's going to be a scorched earth policy. He's going to destroy everything in his wake. And then he fired the heads of the civilian heads of the military and some major, Secretary of Defense. You think he's preparing for a war with Iran? This is the guy who asked 3 times just pre-inauguration, why haven't we fired nuclear weapons? I don't understand. Surely we need to fire them for people to know we're serious. So I can go very quickly to gloom and doom and to a dystopian future and to Mad Max gangs roaming the streets for water and electricity. So what I try and do is I grab hold of and I surround myself with people who are working in solutions, people who are working for a better future, and not some fantastical version on screen, but around me there are people. For instance, I'm hosting next week a gala for a group called Hope Not Hate. And Hope Not Hate expose extremist groups and radicalization, and they educate in schools. And I can take solace in the fact that our local neighborhood is feeding the people who are at home and lonely and vulnerable. And for every story that terrifies me and makes me think there is some abyss we're facing, I can look and I can find some group of people or some organizations where there are shoots of hope and some sense that in the end, there was a great book that came out recently called Humankind, which was about the fact that human beings, I don't know if you saw it or read it, the author on the publicity tour, but it's about the fact that actually human beings, contrary to what we've often been told, are not selfish. We won't run over each other to get to an exit in a fire. We do feed each other, we do support each other, and that's in our basic nature. So the question was, do I worry about the future? The answer is much more so since I had children, but I always did, and now it would be easy to disappear down a pit. But that's partly because the algorithms that are feeding me the stories to read are recognizing what I've read last time. Yeah. It's also true that if I re-steer and recalibrate, I can surround myself with a feeling that there's tremendous amount of hope in the world, particularly in this young generation, and that things are likely to get a lot better. Yeah. Let me bounce it back at you. Do you guys worry about the future? because you're in it. You're actually creating it.
Well, yeah, I mean, for the same reasons as you. And I have kids, and they've been locked down here at home. Both of them should be at university, but for various reasons, that's not happening at the moment. So although I can look and say, well, look, I can do my job, I can sit in front of the screen and type and send emails and so on, they're in limbo. I mean, and a privileged one. I mean, there are people who've got much worse situations, that they have parents who have to go out to work to earn money. The kids are at university in some cases, and we know that these are sort of coronavirus hotspots. But I worry also that if you look back the last few years, there's a really dangerous negative feedback loop, which we're all aware of, and you pointed out, which is that as things get worse, be it climate change, be it coronavirus, be it right-wing politics, people exploit fear. People will go into that gap and work their way into people's minds and make it worse.
It's particularly at times when you are anxious about everything. I mean, not people who are necessarily prone to anxiety, anybody in the street is thinking things aren't going that great. That is the time when you can go, if your life isn't perfect, I'll tell you who to blame, and then fill in the blank. Yeah. Mexicans, women, gay people, any other country, black people, whatever it is, Jews. And that is the time when we are most vulnerable to being exploited and people being radicalized. And you see it everywhere. But the thing is, the fact is Trump lost the election. He didn't win. So I found myself going, oh, what's going to happen now? There's 70 million disaffected Trump voters. He's going to build an army in exile. You know what? He lost. 75 million people or 80 million people voted for Joe Biden. So there are many reasons to be optimistic about our future and about finding solutions to the future. And in fact, space fiction, not necessarily space fact, although you could correct me, Mark, space fiction is one of the places we look to be inspired. And it is inspiration that you need in order to take these small steps. We sometimes need someone to show us the bigger picture, even if it's fictional.
Indeed. Well, it's an interesting point because, of course, you were talking about human kindness and so on. And everything about Star Trek, for instance, it imagines a future humanity where people do cooperate, and, just the other week, I mean, Mark, we had, people who had been aboard the space station as it celebrates its 20th year of, continuous human habitation. And in so many ways, that's a technical marvel. But what it really symbolizes and what's important is, from a cultural standpoint, it represents many nations coming together to do something together, and I guess that's where space is important beyond, I guess, the research it has or the commercial.
That is the one answer I remember Mark giving that I don't have to re-ask, although I do like hearing him talk about it, because I keep saying, what's the point exactly? I mean, I see we're doing all this stuff and it's amazing, but what's the purpose of it? And beyond any scientific, biological, genetic, whatever experiments or technological breakthroughs, just the fact that every country in the world collaborates, even when there's wars going on or tremendous tensions or trade sanctions going on, at some other level, the scientists and the dreamers are collaborating on something we're doing together, whatever that thing is. So happens it's pretty impressive in space.
I think one of the things which is important about that is to remember that also that people exploit the polarization which exists in society, that one group may go one way and the other group may go the other. I mean, I think US politics, I'm maybe a little less sanguine about, how they repair that gulf. And we see it in the UK, we see it around the world, where if you break people too far apart, they find no common ground in the middle. And so for all that we're doing those things out there, and we're flying to Mercury, that we're going to, hopefully, maybe we'll find life on Mars or elsewhere. If we don't take efforts to communicate that in a way which is understandable, and we show people that such things are possible, then you will split society completely. I don't want to say haves and have-nots, but people who believe in
that's unquestionably one of the splits that's happening now and has been exacerbated by the pandemic and will be, and was by a plague 500 years ago as well. That's what happens. I mean, poor people die more because it doesn't have to go to work and expose themselves. There's no way of avoiding that.
Yeah.
And there should be. I mean, I don't know. It's not like I want to advocate for it because I don't want everything I own or have saved to be stripped away. But some part of me is heavily in favor of some kind of major revolution when we come out of this, because we weren't headed in great directions. It's not plenty of the trolls on Twitter would call me some kind of strange pinko communist. I'm not, but I do think maybe the young need to step up and go, do you know what? This was all bullshit. It wasn't leading anyone to. Everyone was just acquiring stuff that's destroying the planet. It's not leading anyone anywhere. And if they shake things up radically, I'll be happy-ish to fall in line. It never comes from people like us because we're too old and settled and want the stuff that we've saved and bought.
Yeah, I think also there's
maybe it's time for revolution.
Well, yeah, I mean, one of the problems with revolutions, as you just said, is lots of people lose their lives in revolutions or in wars.
There
which
is
come at
that.
the end of things. So, you know, I wonder again, though, that because we're in this time of, it's a very interesting political time to look at coronavirus in a sense as a minor metaphor for climate change, because that's going to require the same sorts of things coming together, accepting that maybe we have to change our lives. Maybe we can't have things the way they were. Maybe we can't have the same privileges. I mean, I've been on an airplane about 3 times this year. By this time, normally I would have been on maybe 100 flights.
Yep.
So now I'm beginning to think, well, did I need to do all those 100 flights a year? What am I going to change about my life? But what you see is that in some countries where the politics have played out as kind of against a right-wing backdrop, most notably perhaps the US and the UK, there's a back reaction to that, and people saying, I don't trust the government, so why should I go into lockdown? Why should I take these restrictions? They're trying to, and the UK is particularly a strong example. You see people who I've thought very rational beginning to say, actually, this is all nonsense, this is all bullshit, because I don't trust the people who are telling me to do these things, because they're not rational, they're not consistent. In other countries where people have played that out.
But it's not just that, because what happens, or what I've seen happening, I don't know if I'm not a great cultural commentator, I don't have an overview, but what I've felt happening in the world that I move in is those other, what were fringe arguments early on, have started to gain some traction. So you start hearing people talk about herd immunity again, you go, but didn't you see that means we'd have to lose 3 million people? And other people going, you know, it turns out it's only this many people dying at this age. And you go, well, I don't know, I'm 57, and I think the odds if I was symptomatic are something like 1 in 15 that I might die. I don't like those odds. Well, no, I think they're more like 1 in 40. And you go, would you do any other activity in the world where the odds were 1 in 40? I'd jump out of a plane. I've done that. That's 1 in 3 million or something. But anyway, these arguments begin to gain traction, and they partly gain traction, I think, because, as you said, there is a lack of trust in any authority. And I understand that, in fact, I would endorse not believing anything you're told by any government minister almost ever, because they just don't tell the truth. But the press, you know, we have a pretty responsible press in America and England, proper journalism, not op-ed journalism and, you know, kind of opinion shows. But, you know, we have pretty high standards for corroboration of evidence, and pretty high standards for what, you know, just also because we have relatively punitive defamation laws around as well. And yet people around are, there's COVID fatigue, so they're not reading the science anymore, but they're also just not believing anything that they're told by anyone. So it's much easier for conspiracy theories or unscientific nonsense to gain ground and get some purchase. And that's rather terrifying, I think, because then we can't agree on what's a fact in the future. And if you can't agree on a fact, we're never going to find consensus.
Yeah. I think that's particularly true. Again, I mean, from sitting 200 kilometers off the coast of the UK, it seems to be a stronger effect there than it is here and in Germany, and certainly places like New Zealand, where there seems to be I'm not saying everybody trusts the government in the Netherlands either, but there's more of a sense, well, I've seen them work on my behalf in other areas, so I think perhaps I can trust them in this one as well. But if you've seeded demagoguery and undermined trust in politicians as part of your rise to power, when it comes to something like this, where actually maybe you even are trying to do the right thing, they're not going to listen to you because they don't trust you, and that's a really negative feedback loop we have to.
It's weird though. I mean, Alex, you're here, aren't you? You're in Britain.
I'm here in London. Yeah.
Isn't it weird when you go around and you see loads of people just not doing the shit that would save their lives and other people's lives? You just go, because it's not political. In America, it's political. Americans, people will shoot you for asking to wear a mask, and has happened, and they feel that it's somehow a Democrat hoax, or I don't know what the hell they think, or why they would think it, I don't know. But here it's not political. It's just a lot of people going, oh, fuck it. Not me. I don't care. I don't care, or they're exaggerating or something. It's I don't even know if there's a rationale behind it. Just people not, I mean, in shops, what did the government do for the first 5 or 6 months when you were meant to wear a mask to go into a shop? The people who worked in the shop weren't expected to do it, and they're still not doing it anyway. And you think, well, it doesn't. I mean, it's really simple science. This is not complicated science that's going on here.
Indeed,
it hasn't changed in the 100 years.
Yeah, well, it's this is an interesting thing. I mean, you mentioned destroying the planet, Jason, and again, I guess another intersection between culture and space exploration, because of course, so much of what organizations like ESA do isn't about what's out there. It's about looking back on the Earth and logging and detecting climate change and recognizing those patterns. So I guess it should be no surprise to us that there is no collective decision to try and slow down or halt climate change when there's something so much more obvious as COVID that people are able to deny. Something as abstract as oh,
Well,
changes
it's
in the
slow
atmosphere.
climate change.
Yeah.
So my friend Roland Emmerich made The Day After Tomorrow. That film, Roland made The Patriot and Stay Friendly, and he made The Day After Tomorrow. And I was staying at his house back in those days. I didn't have kids, I don't think, at that point. And his house was full of these books on the coming of the global superstorm. He's an avid reader. I know he makes big box office sci-fi things, but he's a very intelligent man, and he'd gone into this in some depth. And then he wrote a script in which a storm comes in a day, and the whole Earth freezes over, and then it goes away. Spoiler. And it gets solved, and everyone, is happy ever and the dogs live and stuff. And I said to him, why would you make something? Why would you so grossly oversimplify it? And he went, "You've got to tell a story that touches people." And sure enough, he was absolutely right, because his film changed what was on the syllabus in schools all over the world. It got Gorbachev involved in the kind of the green movement. Gorbachev used it and showed it everywhere, and it was a catalyst for all kinds of proper educational change. But he saw that people needed something dramatic like that. And the thing about the incremental changes that we see from climate change, any individual one you could dismiss. You could dismiss. You go, well, the glaciers melted before. Well, this has happened before. So I think COVID, people are dismissing that because they're not watching people die in the streets. Because they don't know people. Most people don't know anyone. Both of my brothers and my dad were in hospital. One of my brothers for a long time. They all nearly died and stuff. So I take it pretty seriously. They're fine now, or recovering. Maybe they have long COVID. But most people don't know anyone, or their mate got it and lost their sense of smell, or so-and-so was in bed for a week. So these figures on the news, a bit like reporting on a glacier that's melting. Well, I don't know. I don't have any glaciers where I live in North London. It's just people talking on the news. So it's easy to ignore. But cheesily bringing it back to science fiction, I do think that because people are so divided and so unable to believe in any independent source, that maybe sources of authority, be they the press or politics, need to stand in the wings for a while. And it's only fiction that will inspire us. It's only fiction that will help us understand who we are and how we can or might be together or work in harmony, because authorities have lost their authority.
Yeah, it's interesting you say that, because Alan Moore, famous comics writer, did Watchmen and everything else, really innovative in the way that he develops narratives and so on. He said one of the worries, about the Marvel films, for instance, is it presents an overly simplified view of how problems can be solved. That there has to be one hero that comes in and it was an interesting thing, because I guess a lot of the solutions to our problems, we don't have all the answers, but they're not the sexiest solutions. They're things that are simple, mundane.
They're really simple, but they involve compromise and sacrifice. Yeah. They all do. To climate change, to COVID, they involve us going, okay, I can't do whatever I want, whenever I want, at any scale I want. And that is just too much for Western exceptionalism in some cases.
Yeah.
And it's shocking.
I think the thing with climate change, it's almost a bad Goldilocks problem. It is exactly as you said. It's happening slowly. It's happening on a time scale that I can't really see the changes day to day, unlike a tsunami coming over me. Yeah. And yet it's happening on a short enough time scale. If we don't do something about it, we will see it in our lifetimes. I mean, all three of us are old enough to have seen changes in the weather. The weather, the climate, as reflected in wintertime, has changed. But it's not quick enough.
Scientists. If someone says to me, these species are extinct now, and this place has heated up, I go, okay, fair enough, I trust you. There are a lot of people who maybe aren't even reading it or listening to it, or have been there is it is filtered through a prism of this is all bullshit because I was told it was bullshit by the guy in the pub, or by my mum, or Trump because I believe him, and so it doesn't really matter who, where, how much data there is. They're not engaging with it. And then those of us who do engage with it, they go, okay, so what should we do? Well, so you and I, Mark, I don't know how much you normally fly, Alex, but you're right. By this stage in this year, I would have flown hundreds of times, and I've paid to carbon offset and everything, but maybe I should have not gone away, earn a bit less money, whatever, and stayed at home. But what does that mean? What practically, how do you put that in place? Do you stop most people flying most of the time? Because then you know what happens. Only very rich people would get to fly.
Yeah.
And that doesn't seem that fair either. Do you hand them out? Suddenly that's communism. And you go, well, there's a flight lottery in your neighborhood. Go and pull your straw out. I'm not quite sure how you administer the world that I think should be coming.
Yeah, I think that's exactly the issue, is that, the solutions, I mean, in some sense, we've all been blamed for climate change. The sort of the narrative is that we all have to change our ways, when in fact, most climate change impact is coming from not a large number of companies who are paying through lobbyists to be able to actually say, well, exempt us, right? Let's point at the public. I mean, of course, we are responsible as individuals, but we need to look at it systemically.
I can't. If my wife buys cake and chocolate and crisps, I'm going to fucking eat it. It's in the kitchen. I don't want it in the kitchen. I need controlling. And I don't think I'm the only person. Yeah. If I can use as much electricity as I want, and I'm able to afford it, or I can go on holiday with my family, I'll do it. But I will vote for someone who stops me doing shit that's bad for me and bad for my children and grandchildren and bad for the world. I'll vote for it because I need someone to be more responsible than me. It's the reason we don't have punitive justice. If someone does something to my kids, I'm not allowed to go and chop their hands and feet off. There is a court somewhere to be slightly more civilized. There are, ministers who are looking at the data on capital punishment and going, it doesn't work. It's not a deterrent, because in the moment you want to do it. And similarly, I don't think any of us have control over the amount of stuff that we buy, whether it's covered in plastic. We need top-down enforcement. And in fact, I was talking to a guy I met, amazing man, I met at a party, who had been very successful in whatever, commercial enterprises he'd done for a long time. And then he'd gradually strip down. Now left this in the middle of London, in Notting Hill or somewhere, lived this existence like a monk, in which he leaves no carbon footprint. He lives on something like $4,000 a year. He goes to the supermarket once a week and buys the stuff they're throwing away, generates their electricity from a bicycle. And it was very, very extreme, very humbling and shaming to talk to someone who was, a Western sophisticate who had gone, I am not making an impact on this world and I'm doing the best I can. Is that he used to do interviews. He started a whole, fashion cares or something. He started a bunch of campaigns of industries. He went, it was bullshit. It's just keeping the hamster wheel going. I'm just going to live this life, and people ask me how I'm doing it, and the ripples will come out from me. Well, I don't have the discipline to do that. But when I asked him about the fact that did he think his individual contribution was going to make a difference, he said, look, the more people make any contribution in their own life, whether it's recycling plastic or something, the more the people who are elected to Parliament will think, Jesus, they all seem to care about that stuff. I better do something, or else I'm not going to get re-elected. So it's not that individuals can make the slightest difference on the real impact, but what we can do is influence the politicians who want to be re-elected. That's the way we can do it, I'm told.
So let's talk about the power of narrative, because again, climate change is difficult to make a film about that's actually realistic, because it's a slow, gradual thing. Roland made a film where it all happened overnight. Whereas the scene behind me here is, of course, from one of your films, Armageddon. This is Paris just before it gets obliterated by a chunk of an asteroid. I mean, and Armageddon and Deep Impact, and there are other films of similar kind. This idea that
Deep Impact, I'm not in that. Let's talk about
Armageddon. You're not in that one. No,
First
exactly.
of all, I don't get to talk to people who know as much science as you. So let's just, before we get into big global issues about how we're going to save our lives and our children's lives, could that happen?
Well, this is
first of all, let's start with, are asteroids likely to come and smash our world to pieces? Because you often read once or twice a week, so-and-so is going to pass within 5,000 miles of Earth or 300 miles of Earth. Is there a real possibility that we're going to get hit by a giant asteroid sometime soon?
The possibility is finite. Yes, there's definitely a possibility. What we know is that obviously, the dinosaurs got topped by a rather large object that hit in Gulf of Mexico 65 million years ago. There's lots of other evidence for big impacts.
I thought it was Jesus. Okay, go on.
So there have been lots of impacts historically, and there are lots of objects in the solar system that in principle are big enough to create an extinction level event. That's from the other film. And
what would we do about it?
Well, what's interesting,
Bruce is getting a bit long in the tooth now to send him up there with some diggers.
Well, firstly, we need to know where the objects are. And we have a pretty good idea by using our telescopes and our satellites to actually measure where particularly the big ones are. And we know where all the extinction level events, sort of 1 kilometer and bigger. We have a pretty good idea where they are.
That's the cutoff, is it? About 1 kilometer.
It's a bit hazy. I mean, you wouldn't want to be underneath something which is 100 meters, right? It wouldn't. It may, if you were living in Paris and it hit Paris, it would be messy. But if you're at that point, you're living in New York, it wouldn't be such a big. So, there's a whole sequence of events which occurs, which is interesting. You think if I'm not in the impact zone, then I'll just ride it out. I'll get some earthquakes. But the problem is when a big object hits the ground at high speed, and we're talking many, kilometers a second, it throws an enormous amount of material up into the sky, not out away from the Earth. It doesn't escape from the Earth's gravity, but it will all rain back down again at some point, on the order of a day or a few days later. And as that material comes back in, it's like having the whole sky full of meteorites. The whole sky starts burning at incredibly high temperatures. So the surface of the Earth gets up to hundreds of degrees. So there's all sorts of ripple-on effects why you think, I'm not in the impact zone, but it's dangerous. So we know where these larger ones are, and there's none on a trajectory.
Stay indoors, essentially. Paris is obliterated by a 100-meter asteroid. Put a hat on.
You'd want to be in the catacombs, really. You want to be, as many meters underground as you can, because your house is going to heat up.
Top tip, because this is, we need to give practical advice here as well. That's good. So you know where they are. You're monitoring them. If it looked like one was coming very close to Earth, what are our contingency plans?
Well, the thing to do is to know where they are the earlier, the earlier the better. So if you can actually see one and it's on a 10 or 100 year time scale, you only have to give it a slight nudge at that point for that nudge effectively to magnify and not hit the Earth. If you leave it until too late, which the films always do, right? I mean, it's almost kind of close to impact, at which point you blow it up and all the stuff's going to hit you anyway. Instead of hitting just one big chunk, lots of small chunks are going to hit you. So the idea of blowing it up when it's already on the trajectory to hit the Earth is kind of pointless. You're just making it worse.
You'd be nudging it by
for example, you could, even in a very trivial way, if you knew about it long enough, you've painted one side of the object white and the other side black, you would be able to get enough radiation pressure difference from one side to the other that the asteroid would move.
You see, now that makes sense. You don't, obviously it's ridiculous you land a bunch of people on to drill and oil with, but you do land a bunch of decorators on who paint one side of it as it streaks through the Earth.
Exactly. No, astronauts not needed, painter and decorators needed.
Okay, good. Good.
But you may be able to do something like detonate a small nuclear explosion, which is typically what the films do. But if you do it many years before, then that little nudge may be enough. So what we're actually doing with NASA and ESA in the near future is we're going to go to a small asteroid on the order of 100 meters or a couple of 100 meters. I'll have to check exactly how big it is, but it's not one of the big planet killers. And we're going to orbit around it, survey it, and then we're going to send an impactor at it and see if we move it by a tiny, tiny, tiny amount. See if we can actually measure that and start understanding the process of, if you move it soon enough, can you divert it off a long-term course? But the point is...
So wait, this ties in slightly to the thing that I'm always asking you, which is, apart from non-stick frying pans and pens that write upside down, why are we doing it? And your answer, very often sociological and cultural, which is about countries working together, the occasional scientific experiment. I am being inclined to gloom and doom, thinking, we go for some benign reason and work out how best to explode a nuclear bomb in space. There's a Blofeld somewhere stroking a cat who's thinking, now we can explode nuclear bomb. Alex, are you not thinking this for me? Did you not go there? Or is it just me?
Well, this is the thing, isn't it? I mean, as we, I guess, discover to our dismay, here in the UK, and stories that I suppose are probably repeated all over the world, and we'll probably spend the rest of our lives finding about, in this real life time of crisis, there are opportunists, who look at this moment as a way to get a leg up or whatever else. And I suppose that's the thing about it all is, we have so many works of fiction to predict how we would react in scenarios, and now we find ourselves in one. And, it's almost as if, our reaction is, I think, a little less inspiring than I would have hoped, but I suppose what you're talking about is a deeper sense of...
Listening to your accent, do you think, not to blame, he didn't come up with coronavirus, and nor is he man responsible for the vaccine, but do you think if there was strong leadership from any of the superpowers, but America in particular, that there would have been a hope of a global unified response in a way that would make us feel heartened?
I've got to say, it's so hard to say, and I think it's going to take a long time to figure out what's happening right now. We'll be spending a long time parsing these historical events. But, there's something that you said earlier that really chimes, it's the thought of people going outside, in spite of all the information that we have, just, as a tiny microcosm of the problems that we face with climate change, and I think it's because people are thinking about what the risk is to themselves. Like, I think I'll be okay. But what they really should be
Right.
thinking about is, what is my risk to others if I behave this way? Because of course you risk transmitting. And I suppose that's the thing is um, if you had that demonstrable example of leadership where it was just like, look, we need to behave this way, not for merely our own benefit, but for the benefit of our neighbors, of our communities, and so on. I think that, perhaps might have influenced, this outcome, but it's so difficult to say, isn't it? Because the reaction has been slow and is in so many science fiction futures that we like to imagine will have somehow gotten over ourselves. And I guess our need to, simply, acquire luxury, that
Does it make you examine or rethink history, the history you were taught? Because I'm watching I've got a 15-year-old at home who's, doing a GCSEs, and I'm watching her study for history. There are these received notions about why countries did certain things and why leaders did certain things. A bit like people used to think that human beings acted out of economic self-interest, and you find out you act out of unconscious bias and a whole bunch of other kind of, whatever the loss thing is called, where you don't want to get out of a plunging stock. Just basically, we're not acting rationally. And when people analyze this, past this, as you said, in the future, will they be able to factor in the different personalities involved? Boris's personality, Angela Merkel's personality, Trump's personality, Bolsonaro's personality, the wonderful woman who's the Prime Minister of New Zealand.
Lucinda,
that's right. That their individual characters and their individual histories and their relationships with the press and with the public have had profound impacts on how the countries and the populations have then behaved. It's not something one studies in history, and it's always arguable, but it's actually far more key in many ways to understand giant world events than themes and patterns.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is an interesting thing, and to loop it back into Star Trek really briefly, I mean, one of the things that Gene Roddenberry originally wrote about was the idea of a humanity that had survived its adolescence. And here we are witnessing the rise of fascist ideas, populism, white supremacy going unchecked, a global pandemic and all that. I mean, it's this does feel like a certain kind of adolescence, something that we kind of have to collectively decide we're going to get through or not, because there's a lot going on, but not to be all doom and gloom, of course. I mean, it seems like there are, as you say, good things happening.
There are great things happening in every community, in every street, and every organization. And I have to say, one of the ways I've stayed sane, it's questionable, my wife's downstairs, you can ask her. One of the ways I've stayed sane-ish is by, and I granted the preamble is, I have the privilege to have time to do stuff, right? I'm not homeless or near to losing my home, which lots of people are. I haven't lost my job. Not working, but I'm lost my job, and I'm not broke. So that's a huge. I'm amazing steps ahead of many, many other people. But because of that, and because I've got some medium profile as a man who puts on funny voices and costumes, I've been able to be of service for the last 6 or 7 months. And one of the things that stopped me disappearing into a well of self-pity and gloom and doom for the world and what's the point is being able to help. And when you're able to help someone in your neighborhood or through various organizations or charities that I get to be involved with, it fills up the soul, and it makes you believe that human beings are capable of greatness, really, transcendental greatness. And from tiny gestures to organizations like Marcus Rashford in the UK, for anyone watching around the world, is a British soccer player who went, well, because people are locked down and because the people have lost their jobs, kids aren't eating, we need to make sure that when schools are closed, they still get free school meals delivered. And the government went, absolutely not. We couldn't possibly afford it. And this young man made it happen. And then when this came to an end because and they weren't getting fed on their holidays, he went, we've got to feed them the holidays. And the government went, no, for this, absolutely not. And he got the country behind him. They did it. And so from those giant things to tiny local neighborly gestures to I'm constantly inspired by the groups that I get to work with and try and raise money for in these difficult times. And I do think that there are extraordinary and wonderful things going on. The difficult thing is to upscale it. When countries go, okay, countries have all pulled their drawbridges up, partly for necessity, for scientific necessity for transmission, but also partly to go, well, we've got our vaccine. We bought a lot of our vaccine, and you've got your vaccine. Well, hopefully ours come through first. And there is instead of everybody reaching out, holding hands and going, we're stronger together, actually people went, well, we got more than you. Well, we haven't got much, but we've got more than them. And that's the terror. That's where you need global leadership, I think, and sacrifice. and that's been missing. But I have some optimism that that spirit has returned with Biden's victory, I hope, and will spread.
I think the thing you mentioned there, and it's very easy to lose sight of if you're not actually involved in it every day, is that actually, I mean, I know it sounds like a motherhood statement, but I think most people are actually good in the world, and they do see it, but it has to be local in some sense, whether it's local to your immediate community. People are very, when times are tough, your kind of long distance altruism tends to get attenuated. You pull in your feelers and you deal with the things that you know. And that's partly, the climate change thing again. Some distant island is flooding. Well, but it's not my island. It's not, yes, but maybe your river floods, and maybe that floodplain you live on, or maybe your crops won't grow anymore. And so there are things where if you can try and identify the local issues, then it can become a groundswell, because it's exactly what you said, this sort of Marcus Rashford effect, and other people who, through the power of their being good in one area, they can galvanize people to change direction. I mean, who thought a footballer would be that person to do that? And it could have been somebody else with a high profile, right? I mean, it turns out to be him, and it's brilliant that he's done that. But there are lots of people.
It also makes other people go, you know what, I can make a difference. I can make a difference here or in my neighborhood or something. But tell me this about science. Why? Because you're a scientist. Surely, because we're talking about climate change. So COVID, we're assuming we're going to get over. There's going to be a lot more death. I wish that people would listen and were able to afford to be supported by the government to keep a long way from each other and not be in each other's houses. I wish my family were doing that. I wish my daughter wasn't officially bubbling with 186 people at school, because that makes no fucking sense to me at all. But, it is what it is. But I'm presuming we're going to get through this. There are a lot of frontline, phase 3 vaccine trials that are delivering great results at the moment. The manufacturing and distribution are a hurdle. Climate change isn't going away soon. Alex has some cursory knowledge of science, more than me, but you, Mark, you're in the forefront. We're spending billions sending people off in tin pots to be able to collaborate. Surely there's a scientific solution. Surely some cold fusion or something is coming along to mean that we don't have to burn fossil fuels anymore. Come on, give us a little hope. I think make some shit up. I wouldn't know.
No, absolutely. I mean, and I think, it's not cold fusion, but hot fusion. So,
that's what I meant.
The cold fusion was kind of the interesting one from 20 years ago, whenever it was. This idea that, you can take a glass of water and stick something in it, and with no problem at all, you'll just get energy out. And that is extremely unlikely. But replicating the interior of the sun, hot fusion, is an incredibly difficult problem, because if you take the sun, you want to hold it in your hands, well, your hands will burn and you'll die. So how do you create a confinement that can take this gas and make it extremely high temperature, high enough that you can push together the hydrogen, or whichever isotope of hydrogen you're using, deuterium or tritium? And we are building machines for that. So I was lucky enough.
I've seen one at your headquarters. I saw something that reproduces the heat of the sun, didn't I?
Well, if you did, that was the secret part you weren't supposed to see. So you need to be. What we have there is we have a simulator for.
I'm only half remembering. No,
you are right. And I was just trying to think what you saw was what we call the large space simulator, which creates the temperature of the outside of the sun, and then beams the light. So that's a few thousand degrees, and we can ramp that up to be the temperature you would see at Mercury, which is around 500 degrees centigrade. Right. But the center of the sun is at millions of degrees, and to do that, you basically have to use incredibly complicated magnetic fields. Really clever maths to use the fact that this plasma is charged and you can hold it without it touching the walls. And there's a huge big machine being built in the south of France called ITER, ITER. And that's a huge international collaboration. It's Europe plus America plus Russia plus China. I mean, it's almost one of the biggest international projects in that regard, designed to replicate the interior of the sun at a level.
What's the time scale of that?
Well, and one of the jokes about nuclear fusion.
If it goes wrong?
Yeah, well, no, it's not like nuclear fission, like a nuclear reactor which gets uranium to split apart or plutonium in weapons. It's the opposite. So in fact, ITER is not dangerous at all, in the sense that if you release the magnetic field, it just all falls apart and there's just a few grams of hot gas flying around. So there is a secondary radiation problem due to as you force the atoms together, they release energy in the form of neutrons, and those neutrons hit the walls of the reactor. And behind the walls, you have effectively water. You heat it up, you make steam, you can run a generator. And those walls get radioactive. but they can never run away. They can't create an explosion. It's nothing like that. So there is a smaller radioactive waste problem. But the timescale is probably another 20 years, 15 to 20 years. Because it's incredibly difficult, right? And the point is that we have solving the energy crisis, there is no simple way. There is no magic button. It's going to be that. It's going to be lots of wind power, right? I mean, if you look at the wind statistics around just last week when it was windy, you were seeing 75% of the total electricity use of Germany, a country, coming from wind for that period of time because it was windy enough. The UK is one of the biggest generators of wind power. It has some of the biggest wind farms off the east coast there. As you fly across to Amsterdam, you see all these huge wind farms. So it's going to be that. It's going to be energy storage. It's going to be, maybe it's going to be using synthetic hydrocarbons where you use electricity from your wind turbines to then take CO2 and water, and you can make that into petrol, but it just hasn't, it's not fossil petrol. And because you've taken CO2 out of the air to make it into this liquid fuel, which you would say, well, that's not, is that carbon neutral? Well, formally, yes, but it's not sucking any carbon out of the air. So why would you use that? Aeroplanes are probably the way to do that because aeroplanes need high energy density. They need to be light. And if you use batteries on aeroplanes, that's problematic. I mean, people who have electric cars know they're heavy because batteries don't store that much charge per kilo. So it's going to be a slog. It's going to be lots and lots of incremental things. There's no one magic answer, but we can do it. We can
do it with the willpower.
We have to have the willpower. Exactly. It's a political issue as much as it's a technical. It's a cultural. It's an individual one. It's maybe not everybody has to be your friend who lives a completely carbon neutral life. But even turning off a few light bulbs.
Partly because I don't think he's got a telephone. So I've got to get in touch with him. I can just open the window and shout. He'll probably hear me.
If I could just interject, because this is a lovely segue, because we have people watching from all over the world today, which is so great.
Hello, people.
Hello, people. Thanks for joining us from Phoenix, Germany, Argentina, Melbourne, Canada, Netherlands, Mexico. The list goes on.
I'd like to be in any of those places rather than the UK right now, particularly Australia and New Zealand if they're coming, and Taiwan.
Indeed. Yeah. So I got to say, well, we have some interesting questions, and it's a nice segue because we're talking about energy and sustainability and so on. We have a potentially controversial as well on the subject of electric cars. Ryan has asked Jason, who would you rather play? I don't know why he says if Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos were comic book villains.
If they were.
But let's just say, who would you rather play and why? Which might be, an interesting one.
I don't want to make enemies of the two richest people in the world, but I've been shocked by Amazon's behavior. We have boxes arriving every day, tons of them. But he's the richest man in the world by far. Multiplied it, doubled during the pandemic, and gives, and seemingly is still in the, if Bill Gates is in chapter 3 of his life, whereas in the third act in which he's giving it all back and trying to make the world a better place. Jeff Bezos is nowhere near that yet. He is not wanting to make the world a better place. He's doing actually what Musk is doing with his unimaginable wealth, which is, what else can I play with? Hey, I can go to space. But it doesn't seem like he wants to solve the world's problems at all. My understanding, without meaning to be defamatory, so it's alleged, is that the employees are not protected in the ways that they could do. They're certainly not compensated in the ways that you would imagine the richest man in the world could afford to do to make them comfortable and safe. I think the Tesla is a remarkable thing. I think Musk says some very stupid and controversial things, particularly around COVID. He seems to be less of the comic book villain at the moment than Bezos, to my mind. But of course, I just played Elon Musk in a film, in the sense that I'm in a film that comes out this week. It's not like this. I'm on a promotion tour with you, but it so happens there's a film out this week which is about a volcano blowing up. I play an entrepreneur who's built a resort in a volcano, and tourists are coming, and obviously, as in all the best entrepreneurs, I'm led by the science, the buzzword, current buzz phrase. And guess what? It all goes wrong, or else it'd be a really crap film, wouldn't it? And the volcano blows up. And when I got there, because it's a Chinese film, everyone else is Chinese, apart from me. The director's not, director's English. And he said, how do you want to play the guy? I said, well, what do you want? He went, I don't care. No one's going to understand the word you're saying. You're going to be dubbed. So I said, well, let's make him South African. Let's make him Elon Musk. Let's make him the entrepreneur who pushes too far. And I did it South African. And a couple of weeks in, I got on YouTube to check what Elon Musk sounded like. It turns out he lost his South African accent many, many years ago, and he doesn't have one. But yeah, I think a combination, maybe a bold electric car maker. How about that?
Well, it's interesting though, because we're talking about world leaders and so on, but increasingly it is not merely elected politicians, but super rich, incredibly powerful people, perhaps, like the Zuckerbergs of the world and so on, who
Zuckerberg washes his hands. I mean, talk about, it's not immoral, it's amoral. He goes, I know that the platform that I invent and completely control is being used to foment war, genocides, massacres, mass rapes in various countries in Africa. Facebook is the internet in many countries in the world. That's when you get a computer, it's loaded with Facebook. That's all people ever know. And there are no people monitoring it. And he says, it's not my job to censor hate speech, Holocaust, and else. It's not my job. It's not what we do. We just provide the platform. Well, actually, it would not make a dent in his sofa change to make sure that those things weren't happening and that people weren't victimized or that there weren't terrible, catastrophic, mortal consequences to the irresponsible use of Facebook. And he just doesn't think it's part of his remit, which is, I find, horrifying. So worse than being evil.
Do you think in that sense, I mean, there's this lovely, story, I think it was Armando Iannucci, of course, who you work with on The Death of Stalin, has sort of said, what's the point of making films with satire anymore about politics? Because politics is even crazier than the craziest film. Yeah. Do you think we're kind of getting to the point that, some of these tech barons, they couldn't even be parodied because they're sort of, what's the point even playing them? Because they are almost absurd, parodies of themselves.
But also, it's not, given that, the context where what we're talking about, it's not a surprise that they've decided to run, that Earth holds no interest for them any longer. It's like Hamlet has that line early on to Rosencrantz and Guildenstern, it holds no interest for them. And they go, let's do space. I can't get immortality. I get the best jobs. I've owned everything I could possibly own. I've got my island retreats. I don't really care about the people that work for me or how they work or making the world's problems a bit better. Bill Gates seems to be interested in that. I'm not old enough to, I don't care. Let's go to space. That seems to be a good toy. Maybe I can land on another planet. Maybe I can colonize a planet, have it named after me.
But even then, there is it's often sold under the guise of being on behalf of humankind, right? This idea that, there's a manifest destiny aspect. Well, they sell it. I mean, they have an enormous number of followers who sign up to this idea that it is human destiny to go out there. And I mean, I always think about, even if you put 1 million people on Mars, what's the mechanism by which you choose which million go? I mean, the number's crazy, but that's 0.1% of the population of the Earth. It's nothing. So you've either chosen them on their wealth,
it's the very rich and the very healthy people,
obviously. Or you get to the point where it's a lottery, as you said earlier on about flying, right? And you choose, and of course, in the sense that goes back to some of these films. Well, we're going to choose a fraction of people who are going to survive.
2012 was that. 2012 did that, didn't it? That's another Roland Emmerich film.
And my sense is actually that the real answer to that would be, if only 1 in 1,000 are going to survive, you and I don't know any of them. I mean, maybe I know 1,000 people, ish, but it's not going to be me. It's not going to be my kids. It's going to be some random person. Why should I pay for them? I'd rather we all die here together, right? I mean, there's almost a sense of Luddism, which will kill off that idea. Right. So this very idea that it's a great thing for humankind, we got to go there to save the Earth. It's like you're consigning 10 billion people to death one way or the other. Should we not focus a little bit more on what we are doing here?
But that surely must be a question you get asked about ESA or about any space. Should we not be focusing on people who don't have food today rather than going to space? That must be something that you deal with in your interactions with the public all the time.
Absolutely. No, I mean, there's a selection effect, and that worries me. The selection effect is that most people who come and listen to my talks, and probably most of the people listening this evening, are people who are kind of, I hate to portray it as being on sides, but they're probably already the converted to some extent. And it's how do I reach the people who aren't? They're paying for it. I'm a civil servant. It's government. It's taxpayers' money. And it's the things we've talked about. It's partly about inspiration, that by showing people who can solve enormously difficult challenges, you can set the scene for in space, which are very visible, right? A rocket takes off. You can watch it. It happens now. You can see a person put a boot somewhere. You can see a probe land on a comet. It's all the same things that we need to make climate change work. You need the same people, and maybe they're inspired by space, that they go and work in the energy industry. They are inspired by an astronaut. Most people can't become astronauts, but they can become doctors and nurses who use medicine, the scientific.
Are you telling me though? Hold on, let me just drill down into this for a second. So I've heard this answer from you. Not that it's bullshit. I like hearing the answer, and I think it's inspirational. It's a message. It's symbolic. Tell me there aren't lots of actually really important discoveries made by the scientific experiments going up there. There actually aren't.
Well, again, some of these things are blue sky.
That was a very telling pause.
No,
Alex,
well,
did you notice that pause?
Because discovery is one thing, whereas doing solid work is the other, right? So all the Earth observation program, as Alex mentioned earlier on, our satellites looking down, they're not discovering things. Some of them are actually scientifically investigating new phenomena, but many of them just about monitoring in high precision and providing the information that governments need in order to divert resources from one place to the other to ensure that you don't end up with drought here and so that's not discovery.
Use of that.
It's a
International
very
Space Station. What's the point of that?
Yeah, well, it's a good question in the sense of its ability to solve problems on the scale looking down. There's a lot of experiments, small scale experiments that take place on board. Some of them weirdly, and this is even a strange one. We've done experiments on board which are linked to oil exploration, better ways of extracting oil out of the. Yeah, well, exactly. I mean, you wonder, well, if company pays and there's a scientific thing behind it, we don't necessarily say no.
Money talks.
Well, it's also because it's interesting science, and many of the things that we do, it comes back to the invention of atomic weapons, right? That was motivated by basic science.
You're digging a bigger hole here. You've got fucking oil exploration up there, and now you're talking about atomic weapons.
Well, we're not doing that on the space station, but the basic research that leads to many discoveries has implications in terms of technology. And the question is exactly that. Where's the balance between science, the public good, between the responsibility that we have in regulation? So the classic one is genetically modified foods and genetically modified organisms. Because we might be interested in cloning human beings as a piece of scientific research, should we do it? And we should have discussions about that. We shouldn't. Well, no, I'm saying maybe we shouldn't, right? And maybe that's a decision that the public should make.
Just maybe we shouldn't, you're thinking.
I absolutely agree.
I'm far be for me to judge. I'm just here to
well, exactly. No, you're asking
exactly.
Every man
wants to know.
But that's exactly the point, right? There are scientists in the world who will say this is pure research and it's a perfectly valid thing to do, to take stem cells and do X, Y, and Z. And we, the public, need to be engaged in those things. I'm going to take one classic example. We talked about Elon and, the Starlink satellites, which are now the aim is to provide high-speed internet around the world from low Earth orbit satellites. They also have a consequence for astronomers because we're going to see lots and lots of bright objects moving around the sky. For the general public who might see the sky full of moving objects, but astronomers are going to see these things in their images. Now, you can argue there's a good and there's a bad. Where do we find the balance? What's the domain? Is it the entrepreneurs versus the scientists? No, it's a public issue as well. And we need to be open to creating fora in which, things that you do, where you talk to people, you bring people together, and through your broad interest in many topics, ask the right questions. Of course you put me on the spot. Is it right to clone human beings? No, it isn't. But it's scientifically possible.
Will happen. The thing is, it seems very unlikely that it actually isn't already somewhere happening behind closed doors. Yeah, of course.
We've seen the movie. There is always a subterranean lab somewhere. We all know this. But this is an interesting thing. So we began the conversation, talking, about the future, and it seems like, as much as we love the notion of something like the Federation, it's more like that Weyland-Yutani kind of Tyrell Corporation future that we seem to be living in right now, which is interesting. And so to bring our audience back in, we've actually got a bunch more questions. We'll never be able to do all of them, unfortunately, because there are a few.
I'm just wondering, space didn't end that well for me in various of the stories. This is how I ended in Event Horizon was that for me at the end, but I'm not keen on returning to that.
It's a hard place.
It wasn't.
Indeed. Well, so Ivan, who is tuning in from the Ukraine, says, so what's your vision of a perfect future? What would you like to see in the next 10 years and the next 20 years? What's your vision of an idealized humanity?
I feel like I'm a contestant in Miss World.
Do us a 12.
What all us want to see. I hope that we manage to get everybody fed and healthy and living lives that are not driven by a need to acquire more stuff, but that of quiet satisfaction. I think we need to slow down the hamster wheel. I think it was interesting. I was listening to was it Daniel Kahneman or Yuval Noah Harari? One of them, Yuval Noah Harari, I think, who wrote *Sapiens*, saying, in many, many ways, the human existence has got so much better in terms of health, and in a million other ways over the last 400 or 500 years. But in measurable ways, as far as we can measure these things, people are not happier. People are actually not happier with their lot than they were when they were suffering and living very difficult and physically challenged lives. So what I want, I like everybody to be able to be, safe in their houses and safe in their lives and lead lives of spiritual satisfaction. How we achieve that, I don't know, incrementally, by not despairing at the big picture and forgetting to address the small picture.
Yeah. I mean, I think just to pick up on one thing you said there, this issue about the lives of almost everybody having improved in the 20th century and the first part of the 21st century. I think this is true. It's demonstrably the case. Now, there are winners and losers, but in some way, the slope has got steeper, but maybe most people have been picked up. Most people have more basic comforts. Without going to all the objects they possess, and a lot of people will also turn and say to that, it's very easy for you and me and others to be negative about human beings' capacity for overconsumption and destruction. Look at the great things of the 20th century. Now, I would only turn that around and say, well, as a metaphor, imagine that you're all sitting out in a very cold part of the Siberian tundra somewhere, and it's a miserable, grim experience. And your house is made of wood, and you say, well, you know what, let's have a party, let's have a barbecue, let's burn the house down. You will have a wonderful evening while the house burns, and you'll be warm and you'll be able to dance, and it'll, for the first time in your life, it'll be great. But then you find the next morning the house is gone and you've got nowhere to go. And I think, so the issue there is we somehow need to see the long term again. People used to plan over much longer timescales. And I don't mean the cathedral thing, or that's what it's called, cathedral thinking, this idea of what am I leaving as a legacy, not just for tomorrow or the week after? What's the world that my grandchildren will inhabit? And how do I, even if I'm not around at the time,
it's hard then, Mark. It's hard. It's hard to think like that. That's delayed gratification to the power of 100. It's hard for most people to think about planting a tree that might, the neighbors can see in my window, the tree's going to take 40 years to grow. I need to put a fence up. I'm not criticizing you. You're right. That's the only way forward. It's the only way we could possibly think. But in some ways, I'm a child. I need the grown-ups to do that for me. And by grown-ups, I mean my representatives. And, in the same way as we delegate those decisions about many other areas of our life to people who are reading their ministerial briefing boxes at night and speaking to people who are thinking and musing on the big questions like yourself. I delegate every other area. I need to delegate that to them too. And I want them to impose those things on me.
Yeah, but the danger is in the current environment, we've allowed demagogues to be those people, those representatives, haven't we? And some people are exploiting that through fear. And if we stand back and say, well, they should be reasonable, shouldn't they? Should see that Brexit is a bad idea. Won't they finally realize that it's a bad idea? Right. So I don't know whether, my wife is very engaged in thinking about how we need to make politics local again. We elect representatives at many levels. If we just think, I vote for the president, I vote for the prime minister, it should all ripple down from there. It really has to be much more local. And it has to be you and I going out and doing something.
I was at a retreat thing where President Sarkozy spoke. He was no longer President Sarkozy, but he was ex-President Sarkozy spoke. And he was very, very passionate about Brexit. It was soon after the Brexit vote. And he was absolutely furious. And he said, and through a translator, but he was on stage, firebrand he was on stage. He was an amazing speaker. And he was talking about how the worst wars in human history, documented wars, have been in Europe. The greatest barbarism was within the last 100 years, the kind of scientific, almost eradication of an entire people. And that even in the mid-90s and the Balkans, there were, rape camps and death camps and mass graves and stuff. He goes, and it was the European Union that has helped to hold that stuff at bay. And how dare they? And he took the whole crowd with him. And then he said, and one of the biggest problem is that every politician within 2 years of being elected is thinking about their re-election. So they can't put in practice long-term thinking. They can't put again, we're all kind of, rallying to him. And then he said, that's why we need to elect politicians that cannot be removed from office. And we all went, yeah. Well, I don't know about that, but I saw where he was going, at least. What he's saying is, if you're in there for 10 years, you can go, I'm going to do this thing. It's unpopular. You're not going to like it. I'm banning petrol cars. Or, you can all have one light bulb, or whatever the hell the stringent measures need. Or we're banning the oil companies. And it's all going to be wind power. And it's going to be really cold, so knit yourself a jumper. Whatever the hell it is that we need to do everywhere, you can do it. But if you're going to be re-elected, you can't do it unless the whole population's with you. And that's we need psychologists, we need behavioral scientists to work out how to make us think like you think, which is, right now, I'd really suffer for something in 100 years or 50 years.
Yeah.
My diet's always starting tomorrow, isn't yours?
Yeah, well, you've had your dinner already. I'm waiting for us to be over so I can go and get fed. No, I'm kidding. No, it's not often that I have a chance to tell my one President Sarkozy, ex-President Sarkozy anecdote as well. Just
I hope you're lining yours up, Alex.
Of course.
to illustrate
Who doesn't have one? Really, come on.
So I was at a meeting in this is Paris after the blinking, the asteroid hit it. So I was there at a meeting years ago, but he wasn't president anymore at the same time. So and I was staying in this little hotel somewhere near the Elysee, the presidential palace, just because of the place I was giving a talk. Came in, booked in, checked in, went off for dinner, and came back. When I came back, I was frisked at the front door. There were people dressed in, bodyguards with headsets and guns and the whole thing. I think,
quite liked it, didn't you? I saw.
Have I come back to the wrong place? Yeah. And apparently they said there's a soiree taking place inside. Ex-President Sarkozy is there, so it's okay. You can go to your room, but just to let you know, this is for the next 5 hours or something. This place is under a complete lockdown. And as I walked into the hotel, every second person was smoking in the place. And this is the time when smoking had been banned indoors
sure.
in Paris for years.
It's France. They smoke in the operating theater.
Well, it just struck me as the ultimate hypocrisy of that, we are different. We people are, right? We are having our party. We can do what we want there. Now, I don't know what to take away from that, but that idea that the great leader will do what's good for you is also somewhat anathema. We want to give responsibility, but that's as often abused as it is. We don't have to go back to 1930s Germany to see what happened when people entrusted.
Of course you're right. And of course we don't want dictatorship. It's odd though, isn't it, that during times of crisis like now, what we'd really like is a benign dictator with absolute authority. Because this terrible disease, which is killing so many people and making a lot of other people very sick for a long time, which people haven't quite processed, would be gone if everybody in the country were able to stay inside for 2 weeks and we just treated the people who were sick. It'd just be done.
Well, look at China, right? Look at China. I mean, people say they've been lying about what's going on.
Look at New Zealand, look at Taiwan. They go, we've had a huge outbreak on the South Island. It's a guy called Brian. That's
he's 10 kilos overweight. There's a huge outbreak. Yeah.
But to be that nimble and to be that authoritarian, to have that compliant population, you need a big stick and a small carrot. And you need a benign dictator. We don't have it. We're a democracy.
Or look, I mean, maybe you get on a plane, you see an emergency exit. It's not a limitation of your freedom to say you can't just open it whenever you want. It's just one of the things, but I guess this is it, but the time really flies. And Jason, I have to ask, this is one from me. I mean, it's fair to say that you're not without confidence when it comes to using your platform to express your political views and, your reactions to, things and all that. Does that present challenges, in terms of your own biography and so on? Because it seems like you're very switched on, kind of person and so on, just in taking on roles and all that, because of course you're in the public arena on a constant basis.
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, I'm very brave confronting bullies and fascists from my bedroom. I'm not out on the streets marching and fighting. There are people who are far more in the fight than I am, and I'm not particularly an outlier in thinking that Trump is a fascist and a liar and a racist and has made the world a much worse place. So it prevents problems in that I get a little bit scared when I get trolled by people who tell me they're going to kill me. So I'm not brave, but I don't want to put myself in any firing line. It makes expressing a political opinion. Whether there are people who are wary of employing me because of that stuff, I wouldn't know, because I don't get the phone call. So maybe I would get much more interesting work from people. Frankly, the entertainment industry is mostly what would be described oddly as liberal. Anyway, it's liberal, but kind of is anti-fascist, which is also now a derogatory label. Antifa, which stands for anti-fascist. Who are the pro-fascists? Are they prophets? I don't know. So I'm not that vocal about things. And quite often on the social media front, I get into a rant, and then I get upset by trolls or something I see, or other. I'm wondering whether. Sorry, I'm going to start that thought again. I don't know that I convert anyone. I don't know that I change anyone's mind about anything. I annoy the trolls. Half of them aren't real. They're bots, or they're algorithms. They're either people or they're algorithms. Or they're people who are very pro-Trump and they want to tell me there's a bullet with my name on it, or they're going to hang me by a mask or whatever. Call me a commie. And I love to keep calling me Hollywood when I live in Northwest London, but whatever. Mostly I do it because it's like Tourette's. I can't stop myself. I'm so angry or upset or bothered by it. But really, I suppose the reason that I bother to do some of that stuff on social media is that I know that there are a lot of people who are in a community surrounded by that kind of lunacy and prejudice and bigotry, and they take solace from it. They take solace in thinking they're not alone, that some actor they've seen in something they might like or whatever also thinks the same. So the reason to put it out there, I wish I could find some way of changing people's minds about anything. Which my wife, my children, my dog, I wish I could change anybody's mind about anything. But I do think that by making sure we don't ever take our eyes off the fact that this is just lies, and that is bullying, and that is madness, and that is unkind, and that is inhuman. It's important that we don't gradually move, our kind of value system, the infrastructure of our morality, so that we begin to see those things as normal. They're not normal, and there are great and kind and loving people in the world. And I think Biden, for all that his many faults may or may not be, or his ability to get things done, is a compassionate man. And we will feel that difference in not just leader of America, because we live in Britain, but the leader of the free world, as America once was.
Yeah. So we've talked about some very deep topics here, things which really are very compelling.
And yet I'm not wearing pants.
No, well,
that's just the way it goes.
We did agree not to talk about that in advance.
Okay, sorry.
No. But we have omitted one topic, which of course is more important than all of these. And I think, Alex, you just need to take a back seat for 1 minute here. So will Liverpool be able to win the Premier League again this season, Jason?
Well, is there any point anybody else playing football ever again? I'm just wondering. It's this great kind of circle of life things. When I was a kid, Liverpool were literally the best football team on the planet that had ever lived. And all of their players played in the national squads, whether it was Scotland or England or Ireland or whatever. And then there was a period of time when we left Liverpool. I'm not saying there's a correlation, but I moved from Liverpool, and that was no longer the case for about 45 years. And now, once again, they're the best team in the world. It might be because I have an LFC mug that they sent me and a lifetime membership. God bless you, everyone at Liverpool. I haven't yet been to a game, so just sent me that thing. But you'll never walk alone. Yeah.
So you narrated the video. I've got it on my PVR.
I did. I narrated a documentary about the history of Liverpool. It's one of the great places of my life. And I said to the guys who booked me to do it, you can't see me behind me. I've got the Star Trek thing, but I've got a little voice studio behind me. And I said, do you want me to have a Liverpool accent? They said, well, you don't need to put an accent on. I said, no, I have a Liverpool accent. It's been buried inside me for about 45 years, but it's always there. I just need to unearth it. And they went, yeah, do that. So I did this, I spoke in a voice that I had when I was 11, which is not much more Liverpool than this. It's just very mildly like that. There's a tune to it. It's got a musicality to it. And I narrated it like that. And a lot of people phoned up and thought that I'd put an accent on. But really, I was just peeling back all the layers of pretense that have built up over the years.
Oh, yeah. That's brilliant. So just for the sake of the audience, I have never lived in Liverpool. My father's from there, and they've been my team for the same length of time. And it almost felt like it was never going to be real, didn't it? Right? I mean, it had to be completed against empty stadiums
to win. I mean, any sport. So I'm a mad keen tennis fan. I'm not, because I play a lot of tennis, and so I go to the stadiums and I watch them, and I'm incredibly impressed by all the sports women and men around the world who are managing to still produce extraordinary performances where there's no crowd there, which makes a huge difference. And they're also bubbling, and it's hard to bubble. I've just come back from a film in Hungary. It's difficult. How much more difficult must it be to keep yourself at peak physical fitness and to be able to perform? But frankly, in this, lockdown is a crazy thing. Even if you're privileged enough to not be panicked about how you're going to pay your bills, it's still a crazy thing. And to have some linchpins of normality, some kind of temp pace, like to be able to watch sport it's an enormous privilege, and it just reminds you that there is a normal world and we might well get back to it. So it's a joy to watch.
So I'm going to rely on you I've got lots of relatives who live in Liverpool who said, next time you're up, we'll take you to Anfield. It's shocking. I think I should be able to get us a ticket. It's not like I don't love them, Exactly. I think we will have to do this, Jason. So let's pray for normality coming sooner.
I'll get you in the dressing room. How about that one? I don't know if that's true. Sorry.
What was that about? You not wearing any pants? I mean, come on.
That's right.
Where's this metaphor going?
Obviously. Don't have streakers anymore. Have you noticed that? There's no streakers anymore.
Well, you need a late career move, right? If your popularity dips on Twitter, you need something to drag the attention.
That's right. I need something. It's true. This is all true.
Okay, well, we'll bring it back. All right, you heard it here first. Okay,
Are you watching Star Trek, by the way? Are you watching Discovery 3?
Absolutely.
Did they do well? They're
Indeed.
they're so good. The
Ah.
actors are so, I mean, I like them personally, but I love watching them as well. I don't know how biased I am or warped I am, but I love watching all the actors in that. Particularly Doug Jones. For anyone who's not watching it, I watch it. It's great. I was in it, but I'm not anymore, so I'm not advocating myself.
Are you never coming back? This is the big question.
Anyway, Doug Jones, who plays Saru, Captain Saru, has got a big rubber bucket that he wears for a head. It's so fucking uncomfortable and heavy on his lovely, delicate neck. And he wears these shoes, big high-heeled shoes, that have no heels. They've taken away. So he's in this perpetual state of about to fall off something. And he never complains. Not only does he never complain, this is, behind the curtain. On camera, he managed to create a fully three-dimensional character who we've seen grow from being prey to predator to, captain material. And he does it all with no moving parts on his face, just with the tilt of the head and a pause and a crack in his voice and with his strange body position. I think it's if they had television Oscars, it should go to Doug Jones. That's what I say.
I couldn't agree more. And speaking as a a lifelong fan and just enamored with Discovery, you are a huge part of that reason. But I think so much of what Discovery I think achieves is it creates believable stories about people, whatever species they may be. And I think that's what makes it so unique and brilliant, because it is believable, flawed people, struggling through. And I think that's
also that great thing. Sorry, Alex, I didn't mean to interrupt.
No, not at all. Go ahead.
Well, it's just saying there is that great thing about sci-fi and about fantasy stories generally, but particularly sci-fi in Star Trek, which is the world is so polarized right now. It's a cliche, but it's a cliche because it's true. People are at each other's throats, and families and friends who are at each other's throats, or communities that disagree with each other, will watch a story about what doesn't seem to be their life and their world and be taken away and moved and empathize and be compassionate about something that is a very, very clear, very thinly disguised version of something that's happening in their streets. But if it was set in their streets, they would instantly be entrenched in their position. And because these stories work, and they work over, slowly and subliminally, you can change people's minds that way. You can open people's hearts that way, and you can move the world forward that way. That's why sci-fi is so valuable in storytelling.
I don't think it's not a coincidence. I think that, and it's the programs that Alex and I watch ourselves, but many in the audience do, have been Star Trek, The Expanse, Battlestar Galactica, and we've come back to those, and we've talked to Katie Sackhoff and Tricia Helfer and Shohreh Aghdashloo and so on. And it is that.
Can I throw the OA in? Does OA count as science fiction?
Well, absolutely. And in fact, somebody was telling me
it's incredibly human and beautiful.
Yeah, and I haven't seen it yet. You would think after 9 months.
Right, I'm leaving. Goodbye. Thanks very much. Good night.
Yeah, well, I'm saving things. Don't save
it. It's too good. Don't save it.
I'm not saving in the sense I'm never going to watch it. But that, if I'm right, that's done, right? That's finished. And did it, without asking questions, which would be spoilers for me, did it actually finish, or did it kind of get chopped off at a point where there was a much more of a story to tell? It was meant to be
5 seasons. They did this extraordinary thing. So when you're watching the sci-fi seasons you're talking about, including Star Trek and everything else, you make a season. You hope people like it. If they do, you think, great, we'll carry on. So that's why Star Trek has these season-long arcs, big stories, pieces of mythology uncovered. But with the OA, which I think qualifies somewhere as sci-fi. It's human. It doesn't really belong in any genre. It's so beautiful. It's every genre. But they did an extraordinary thing. They took a year, I think, maybe longer, and they mapped out all 5 seasons of the show, which was an incredibly interconnected and rich and complex labyrinth of story. And they broke it up into seasons. Then they wrote the whole first season, and then they took it to television networks, at which point everybody fell on the floor, kind of doolally, because then it read or seen anything like it. And you can sense when you watch it, not only are you in the hands of storytellers who know exactly what they're doing and how they're doing it, where they're doing it, but it's completely original, fresh voice, because there's no fingerprints of development on it, because you couldn't take a show that is so unusual and say, well, it's a bit like this thing we've made before, so why don't we shape the story this way? So anyway, I loved it. But one of the things to love about it was it's so completely relatable, that awful cliche word, and yet it's so unlike anything that's ever happened to any of us. Again, you can't sit in your entrenched positions and go, well, I never like things like this, or I wouldn't do that, because it's so far out of our experience. It's like, in that sense, it is like sci-fi. And intensely human.
Yeah, we just finished last
commercial over. I loved it. We did 2 seasons of it, and Netflix then decided not to make any more, as they've done with many shows after 2 seasons. But those 2 seasons are works of art and worth watching by themselves.
Definitely will. We've just finished the first season of Dark. I don't know if you've seen that German.
I haven't seen it.
It's amazing. I mean, it's a stunning piece of atmospheric piece. I don't think you come out loving any of the people in it. Dark.
Is it dark?
Dark. Yeah. D-A-R-K.
Is it dark and depressing and gloomy? Because I've got enough of that shit in the news every day.
Yeah, save it for when it's all over then, because you will not come out of Dark feeling any the better about life. But it's
no interest at all.
Brilliant stuff.
To perhaps bring it full circle, back to the beginning, and perhaps where we close at least this chapter is maybe what people love about Star Trek isn't that it's a perfect future, but that it's a hopeful one. That's something I think that people have related.
It's the best of us. It's the best of what we can be. And it's us reaching for the best in ourselves, and that's all we can ever hope for.
Amen to that. Amen to that. Well, I think first off, Jason, I got to thank you so much for your time this evening.
It's a joy to see both of you.
I
wish we were in person.
Indeed,
I can't wait to come to Holland again and drag my reluctant children and get to play with all your gadgets. And I now there's a whole host of other people I promised to bring to an open day at ESA. So
absolutely. And any of them, I mean, it sounds like an advert from us. Any of them who you think might like to come and have a chat with us on Uplink in the meantime, because I don't think we're getting out of, we're going back to anything like normal for a while. Any of your friends who, I know Tom Felton, he's not available to us because we can't afford him, but...
He's actually shooting at the moment in New Mexico. As he's busy, he's filming at the moment. I did ask him, but I'm trying to think, who do I know in sci-fi shows? Well, obviously I know the cast of Star Trek.
There you go.
They might like to come.
We're not picky, just if Emma's around or
right,
that'll be fine. We'll chat to anybody.
It's a joy. I will be watching in future and send my love to everyone. No, well, you're staying at home, aren't you? So I'm going to say send my love to everyone in space.
Well, absolutely, yes. Well, there's people up there at the moment. There's 7 of them up there at the moment, indeed. So it's busy time up there.
They've dodged a bullet, I have to say. It's a good time to be up there. I'd like to be in New Zealand or the International Space Station. One of those 2 places, I'll be fine.
The ultimate coronavirus bubble.
Indeed.
So,
very good.
Thank you for having me.
And, thank you for joining. We do have one request before you go, which is tradition. Actually, Mark, I think this might be the easiest time we've done this.
Yeah, I think we've done it. We've done it together before, so the drill. The space, which and the rocks.
Yeah. Oh, hold on.
Space rocks. Yeah, exactly. So
my hands look very, very white in this light.
Perfect.
I've got the ring light, the junket ring lights.
Excellent.
Yeah. There we go.
Thank you very much, Jason. Great pleasure.
Thanks, everyone. Anyone who tuned in to watch, good luck and stay safe and stay distant. And I'll see you on the flip side. Lots of love, everyone.
Yeah, be well.
Bye, Jason. Thanks very much.
Very good. Well, Mark, geez, I've got to say, I never feel like an hour has gone by in Uplink, but that felt like 3 minutes. I mean, Jason is amazing.
Yeah, I mean, and so many topics we could have discussed, and maybe people were listening in and hoping for us to get, maybe a little bit more into this or that. But I think that it has been clear to those of us who know him and people who follow him on Twitter, he's a very clued in guy, very engaged and worried, as many of us are, about the state of the world, but also using his platform to do something positive about it. And I think that's a lesson to all of us. We all have platforms of some scale, whether it's local or larger, like Jason has. And we should all be optimistic that we'll get out of this, and maybe we should work together a little bit better and a little bit more rationally.
Indeed. He says with a Zoom background of a gigantic
a great big hole in the ground. Yeah, I didn't even mention it. I do have to say, for anybody that's still watching on, I needed to pull something out for what we were doing today, and this is from Armageddon, of course. But what was fascinating to me was the picture I had earlier on, just so everybody sees it. This is, in principle, it's Paris just before the great thing flies in and blows up that hole in the ground you can see there. And these gargoyles, they're actually on Notre Dame, the cathedral, and that's the wrong place, because Notre Dame is actually on the other side in this where this picture is. So that's Invalides, and behind my shoulder is, you can just about see it there, is the Eiffel Tower. And what I found when I looked at the picture is that European Space Agency's Paris headquarters is right where my chin is now. It's in this picture. So I have no idea whether that was on purpose. I doubt it enormously, but the fact that ESA is right in the middle of the bit that almost gets obliterated by an asteroid does give us a bit more responsibility to go and look for them.
Ex-employee, who knows? I mean, but hey, it's one of those things. But I have to say, as ever, Mark, you know, it's not just about our guests, but all the people that join us from all over the world and support what we do. You know, not just, you know, Jason Isaacs, but everyone that's come by to check out what we're all about, especially all the new faces. If you want to keep in touch, just subscribe to our YouTube or go to spacerocksofficial.com and subscribe to our newsletter. We'll be flinging some mission updates out there to keep you appraised of all the future activities that we have going on. And Mark, as ever, it's an absolute pleasure to spend this time.
Yeah, likewise. It's always great. We don't know what we're doing next week yet, but hopefully we see you here next Thursday, and it'll be a surprise to both of us.
Indeed. Very good. All right. We'll see you soon.